This week in the conversation, I have the privilege to welcome out of Chicago fantasy author Isaac Sher. We're going to be talking about his impressive fantasy novel titled A Cloak of Blades. Of course, he has another project we'll be talking about too. It's a new novel that he's currently working on with a working title, Thy Eternal Summer. But before we get into this interesting video, I just want to remind you again, it's important to continue to lend your support behind my new novel titled Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring. An interesting story as readers after readers have been telling me, which pleases me immensely. And if you haven't purchased your copy, I just want to let you know that the book is available everywhere they sell books, including Walmart. I keep saying that. So this is to tell you that you can find it any way you want to. So, and also, I encouraging you to, as I always do, to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And also, if you think this video after you watch it is of some interest to you, you can simply don't forget to hit the like button and also leave us a little comment too. And if you have already subscribed, you can also tell your friends to do the same. And when they do, they need to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, I'll go to them as soon as possible. So let's get started. My name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this evening with a very impressive author, fantasy author. I'm here with Isaac Sher.
Thank you,
Joining me from Chicago. And tonight we're going to be talking about his impressive fantasy novel titled A Cloak of Blades. And then later in the program, we'll be talking about also his current project. It's a novel, again, another fantasy story titled Thy Eternal Summer.
That's the working title, yes.
Okay. So Isaac, welcome to the conversation.
Feel very welcome to be here, Ardain. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Okay. So to begin with, so could you please tell the audience of CSMS Magazine who is Isaac Sher?
Certainly. So I grew up in Cincinnati originally, and then went to college in Indiana at a little place called Earlham, the classic Midwestern liberal arts college.
Okay.
And then graduated from there and moved to Chicago because I had some family. Let's see here. So I started my journey of becoming a writer about 7-8 years ago, where I decided, yeah, I want to write a novel.
Okay.
My first attempt didn't quite pan out. I never actually finished it. It was just sort of, it didn't quite work. It was a superhero story that didn't come together in a way I liked. My second attempt was a romance that was set at an anime convention.
Okay.
And I got I got to an end with it, but I wasn't happy with the final result, so I didn't publish it. And then about 4 years ago, I went on a trip to Japan that really changed my life in a lot of ways. But one specific thing relevant to this discussion is that while I was in Japan, I did a lot of writing, sort of a travelogue of what I was experiencing with me and my dad as we went through Japan on this 2-week tour. And I got a lot of really positive response from people. And I feel that I really improved my skill as an author with these essays. And that really cemented for me that, okay, yeah, being a writer is definitely the right path. If I'm able to produce something of this, what I felt was this level of quality, I was very proud of those essays, still am, that I thought, okay, writing fiction or otherwise is definitely something I want to pursue. And then this was enhanced further. Well, enhanced isn't right. It maybe pushed to the forefront further, because shortly after my return from Japan, I was diagnosed with a very serious chronic illness. I don't know if you want me to necessarily go into any sort of detail on that. Let's just say I'm lucky to be alive. And
Okay.
I'm surviving very well, but the odds of survival with what I have in particular are very low. So I'm doing very well with that. But the act of being in the hospital and confronting my own mortality then pushed even further to the forefront. Okay, I need to get my voice out there as an author.
Okay.
And so I started the first project actually was Thy Eternal Summer, although it didn't have a title then. It was an urban fantasy romance that was set in Japan and was at least partially inspired by the trip I had just taken.
Okay.
And I was working on that for about 1.5 years to while I was recovering from my hospitalization and then the work that came after that. And it wasn't quite clicking. I felt stalled on it. So I thought, like, okay, I'm going to back burner this for a little bit. And I'm going to start on what I thought was just going to be a short story as just a palate cleanser.
Mm-hmm.
And that short story took on a whole life of its own.
When?
Blossomed from a short story to a novella to a full-length novel.
Okay.
And ended up being my debut work.
Okay.
That turned
So,
into
if I understand correctly, Isaac, so A Cloak of Blades was not the intended original story was going to be.
No,
because within the
it
process
changed.
of writing this impeccable novel, which has yet to be published, then was born A Cloak of Blades.
Yes, Thy
Okay.
Eternal Summer technically came first and is nearly done now. I've come back to it now that Cloak of Blades has been published, but Cloak of Blades just fell out of me. The initial novella version of it, I wrote that in under a month. I was shocked. And then I expanded on it a little bit more over the next month, showed it to a friend who was my editor at the time, and he said, there's a full-length novel in here, expand on these particular points. So since you've read it, let me just give a framework here.
Okay.
The book is divided into 3 sections. Section 2 and 3 were the original novella. Section 1 was written later at my editor's encouragement to flesh out the backstory that had only been hinted at in what is now sections 2 and 3. And I feel that he made the right call on that the book is a more complete story for having fleshed out that backstory and laid some groundwork that then expanded on what came later.
And you know what, honestly, I really love the protagonist, Lindoriel. He's a chaplain and a healer, and actually he's taking the lead, and he must find a way not only to support his crewmates, but also to come to an understanding with First Officer Coriolis.
Coriolis, actually, but
yeah,
sorry, I'm nitpicking.
She's a lady, and with a very, has a lot of magical talents. So how as a fantasy a writer, how do you find the skill to create such, image capturing, or how would I call it? You capture the imagination of everyone who loves to escape from this reality, our daily stressors, to find you on your own little world. How do you find the skill to do that?
Well, I will say that the primary reason I write is to have fun.
Okay.
I want to write stories that are fun for me to write, fun for me to go back and read, and hopefully fun for people to read as well, other people to read. So if I'm not enjoying myself while writing it, then I kind of like, okay, this isn't working. I need to set it aside and do something different. But in terms of how you develop that skill, I think there's an adage called fail faster that I think is a very powerful thought process. And the idea is that you can never create a perfect thing. And attempting to is actually self-defeating. So the idea here is you create something that is imperfect. and you allow it to be imperfect, but you get it to a point of completion, and then you release it either by publishing it or maybe showing it to some friends or shelving it entirely. But you finish it, it's done. And then you take what you've learned from the act of completing that and apply it to the next project. And so, even if that project is a failure, you said with air quotes, you learn from that experience. So so Cloak of Blades was not my first novel. It's the first one I published, but it's not the first one I wrote.
I like the way you say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So there were the other two books that came before, one of which just never got done. It just fell apart. Then the next one, I at least got to an ending point, but I didn't like how it hung together overall. But it was still an improvement on the first one. And then I've got Thy Eternal Summer, and I got partway through and was like, okay, now let's do Cloak. And I applied what I'd learned from those 3 past projects, just in terms of, okay, this kind of characterization works, this kind of characterization doesn't. You got to be careful about not overusing the same turn of phrase, too frequently. Making sure that senses are engaged. Like, what does this place smell like? What sort of sights are people seeing? What's the weather like there? What kind of culture do these people have?
So, which comes to one thing, which is the most strategic component in writing fantasy, is what you call the world building.
I love world building.
You do.
It's half the fun for me.
So what do you think? It's because after it's been conceived, you realize that I'm well on my way. Is that feeling that makes you? It's a feeling of you're conquering something.
I don't know if I'd put it in terms of conquest. That's an interesting thought, but I don't know if that's the way I approached it. It was more of this is an incomplete metaphor, but painting a canvas where you're filling in the details,
right,
and you're slowly reaching the edge of the canvas.
Right, exactly.
And as you're going, the canvas keeps growing with more and more blank space to fill. And the act of filling what you had already inspires new ideas. Like, okay, well, if they're doing this, and that follows that they're also thinking about this in their culture, and they approach it this way. So I start filling in those details. One of the things in Cloak of Blades is I talk about some of the popular music of that culture. Why do they like that kind of popular music? What does that say about the people of this society that particular music is popular? Things like that. Just what kind of food do they eat? Why? I love filling in those details because I love the act of creation, the act of coming up with what this world of arcane space is like in my mind. Putting as much of it down on the paper. And in fact, that's one thing I have to be careful about, is not to let the world building overwhelm the book, where I start just dropping essays upon essays about the theological implications of this, that, and the other in this setting's theology. I could go for hours on that tangent alone. I've worked out a whole lot of details about that sort of thing, but it doesn't necessarily make the best story. So I have to shuffle it into the background, and I can tease details of it, which then gives the larger world texture, but doesn't overwhelm the narrative. And that's a hard lesson.
Let me ask you something, Isaac. Don't you think that you had mixed feelings after conceiving A Cloak of Blades? Now, because you feel maybe you've cheated on the Thy Eternal Summer, since it was the first baby.
I see what you mean. Well, no, not really, because finishing Cloak of Blades really, I think, strengthened my skills as an author. When I came back to Thy Eternal Summer, using the lessons I'd learned from Cloak, I felt that Thy Eternal Summer became a much stronger piece of work. For having done that. I didn't feel bad. For having done that. It felt like it was a necessary like at the time I thought it was going to just be a palate cleanse. Like, okay, I'm going to break, just do something else.
Okay.
But then now having come back, I felt stronger and more inspired for having taken that break.
But so let me ask you something now. So since you said you're about three-quarter done with thy Eternal Summer, when do you think we can have a chance to read it?
I was hoping to have it done before the end of this year. That's optimistic now. I don't think that's going to happen that quickly. But I would be very shocked if it's not published before the end of 2023. Hopefully,
Okay.
my goal is to have it completely done, edited, ready by summer of 2023. Knock on wood. But I want it. I was about to say I want to take as much time as it needs, but that's not really true, because like I said before, you can't over refine something. You know, if you get something to a point of completion and then you just start chipping away at it to try and get it perfect, at that point you're spinning your wheels. There's only so much refinement you can do before you're just wasting your time. It's like, you know, right now though, it's not at a point of completion yet. I can say that confidently.
Okay.
The story
and you know what they say in writing or in creative writing, perfection is a relative term. So at some point, you're gonna have to call it, you know, at some point.
So I'm at the point where I'm still fleshing out the main narrative through line.
Okay.
And I know where it's going. It's just a matter of buckling down and getting it out of my head and onto the screen and making sure I'm doing it in a coherent way. So it's not done yet. I'm not at the point of refinement yet.
Okay.
But I'm confident that I will be able to do that in the coming months. Certainly by this time. If it's not done by this time next year, then something's gone wrong. So.
Okay, so now let me ask you something, because I know every fantasy author that I have as a guest in the conversation, they always say there was always the moment of awakening when they realize they are becoming a fantasy author. Because I know you said since you were very young, you had been reading fantasy stories. So to what point then you realize, you say, well, I think I'm going to be a fantasy author? I know you said that in your introduction, but since you were very young, did you realize that someday you were going to go up to become an author?
Yes, but not consciously.
Not consciously.
I can point to a specific moment. I'll expand on that in a second here.
Right.
With this moment, I didn't know that I wanted to be an author consciously yet, but I did know that fantasy stories expanded my world and really expanded my idea of what could be just done with my time.
Right.
And at that moment, my conscious thought was, I want to experience more stories like this.
Right.
But that very quickly became like not just that, but I wanted to I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons as a small child when that was brand new in the late 70s, early 80s. And I loved to be the dungeon master, you know, where you're the one telling the story for the other players. And so looking back on that, it's like, yeah, I wanted to be a storyteller from a very young age, but I didn't think of it in terms of me writing the book.
Okay.
That wasn't a conscious thought yet. That didn't happen until my 30s. And I'm a little shocked that it took that long. Okay. But what that moment was when I was 5 years old. This would have been 1979. On television, they aired the Rankin Bass animated version of The Hobbit.
Okay.
Of course, J.R.R. Tolkien, classic story, but the Rankin Bass animated version is really a classic. And the specific scene that really blew me away was about 2/3 or so of the way through, where Bilbo has entered into the dragon's cave.
Okay.
And is verbally sparring with Smaug the dragon, while he's trying to, get out of there safely. And that exchange, the performance of those two actors, I can still go back and watch that scene, and it sends chills down my spine every time. That scene just really inspired me. That's the best word I can think of for it. It really expanded my thoughts of like, wow, I want to tell stories like this. I want to experience more stories like this myself. This is the moment where everything changed. I can definitely point to that scene back in 1979.
You were only 5.
Oh yeah,
Let
was
me
hooked on
ask you
fantasy from
something.
that
Is
moment
that
forward.
this particular author who clearly inspired you to become a fantasy writer?
Oddly enough, not Tolkien. I like The Hobbit. Most of his other stuff is a little dry for me. And like The Lord of the Rings, I love the plot of it. The narrative, not so much. The author that's inspired me the most, I would say 2. The first one is Terry Pratchett, most famous for his Discworld novels, fantasy. And his emotional depth through his writing has always been an inspiration to me, where he's not just talking about the goings on in this fantasy city of Ankh-Morpork or the Lanker Mountains or whatever other locale he's focusing on. It's not just about that. It's that he's reaching into deep issues of what it means to be alive, what it means to be a person, or even just the nature of life itself. And that kind of emotional depth and honesty has been a real inspiration to me. And then the other author is Lois McMaster Bujold, who's mostly known for her science fiction, but she's done some fantasy as well.
Is she a British author? Or?
I don't believe so. Bujold, Bujold. I don't think she's, no, I think she's American.
She's American.
But her most famous books are the ones dealing with a character she created called Miles Vorkosigan. It's called the Vorkosigan Saga informally. But there are 2 other books she did that are fantasy called The Curse of Shalion and Paladin of Souls. The Paladin is sequel to The Curse of Shalion. And those were very eye-opening for me, not just in terms of storytelling, although the storytelling is brilliant, but also in terms of what defines a protagonist, what makes for a heroic figure, and also in terms of world building. Like in Shalion specifically, she builds this sort of it's based loosely off of medieval Spain, but she adds in some fantastical theology to it, and that texture, that world building of the way she thought very deeply about how the religion worked, and how there were differing views of the people of that religion. It's not like, oh well, everyone knows Zeus does this. No, there's theological arguments even within certain countries. Like, oh no, there's divisions, there's schisms, there's differing interpretations, even though these are real gods who directly intervene in the lives of mortals. There's still a lot of theological discussion and thought and confusion. Faith still had a place there. And that was interesting and inspiring to me. And I tried to incorporate some of that into Cloak of Blades, where, my main character is a priest. And, and he talks a little bit in the book about what it means to him to be a priest. And the thing is, I myself am agnostic. I don't know if there's a divine being out there. I can't say for sure either way. I do believe that there's more out in this world than we're able to perceive with our 5 senses, but I can't claim to know what that is. But I'm very interested in spirituality. So to do a brief digression, when I was in Japan, we happened to stumble upon this ritual. at
Okay.
Shitanoji Temple in Osaka.
Mm-hmm.
We were just planning to go see the temple because it had a beautiful garden. We had no plans beyond that. But we happened to walk in where we turned left instead of right, just on a whim, could have gone either way. But because we turned left instead of right, we walked in just in time for them to witness this ritual that is done there at 11 o'clock
Okay.
every day, where they bring out this relic that inside this box is supposed to be the mummified eye of Gautama
Really?
Buddha.
Uh-huh.
And there is a worshipful service where there's chanting and drumming. And I was struck to the floor, almost literally. I was shaken by the beauty of it and the sense of serendipity of I almost missed this. I had no idea this was here. And that was the first moment where I could really understand where people of faith talk about where they could feel the hand of their chosen deity on their shoulders, so to speak, where they could feel their God's presence. And it wasn't quite like that for me, because again, I don't know if I believe in that level of theological approach, but I could understand where it was coming from, and I could feel the sincerity and the beauty and the love of that ritual, the veneration, and how this inspired deep emotions and comfort in the people who participated in it, who believed in Buddha and the related traditions surrounding him and this temple. And so I incorporated that kind of thought about spirituality and religion into my work. Because even though I don't know if there's a real God or goddess or whatever out there, I can appreciate the thought behind it. And I can appreciate imagining, like, well, even in Cloak of Blades, there are gods that are real, but there's a lot of debate as to what's going on with those gods, because of a lot of gods are absent. And there's debate among theologians in that setting of,
and that's what makes the story
what
so
happened to
important, because your characters, they immediately at that point they become so real, so close to us as humans. You know?
It's so exploring that, the emotions of the theology and the ideas behind the theology, is something that is endlessly fascinating to me, even as an agnostic myself.
Okay. So now, since we've been talking for about a half hour now, we're getting into the end of the conversation, but I needed to ask you a couple more questions.
Sure. Sorry if I went too long.
You say there might be a chance towards the end of next year we can have the Thai Eternal Summer. But between now and then, is there any short novella that we can expect from you?
Nothing specifically planned. I have some short fiction published online here and there. I'm planning to maybe do some more of that, but my real goal right now is to focus on finishing Thy Eternal Summer. It's been, it's 4 years in coming, and I really want to get it to a point where I can release it into the world. And I'm close. I'm nearly
and my
there.
next question, because I know most of the fantasy writers, I know the ones I know, they also pitch their work with movie producers. And have you ever anticipated something like that?
Ooh, well, I would love to. The idea of a movie, live action or animated or whatever, of a Cloak of Blades excites me. That would be, or a TV series on, like something like The Expanse. I that would tickle me. That would be wonderful if something like that happened. Cross your fingers. But I've certainly not had any discussions along that yet. But I'm certainly not averse to the idea.
Okay.
I will say with Thy Eternal Summer, one thing I feel very good about is there is an experienced romance author who I've talked to. She's a wonderful work, lots of books out there, and she's basically said, when Thy Eternal Summer is done, send me the manuscript, we'll workshop it together, and maybe she might be able to help put it in front of some publishers,
Okay.
to get some attention to it. Because Cloak is self-published. It, you just buy it directly on Amazon, print on demand, or from me directly. But who knows? Thy Eternal Summer might be something that could get the attention of a legitimate publisher, or beyond. Who knows?
Well, my last question: if there's a lesson you want to give to any young fantasy writers out there who would love to be published someday, so what lesson would you give to that person?
Don't be afraid to self-publish.
Okay.
It's more important to get your voice out there to 10 people that than to not get it out there at all. If because I was honestly worried. Like it was the initial drive for getting the book done was get a book out before you die.
Okay.
Because I was genuinely fearful for my long-term health. I've beaten the odds. I've lived longer than I was expected to, and I got a book out before I died, so I feel good about that. But I mean, we only have so much time. And there's probably millions of people out there who have a manuscript for a book on their computer or in their head or in a notebook somewhere, and they don't believe that they can do it. They don't believe it can be real. And I think my one overriding thought to that would be, don't be afraid to put it out there. The technology has evolved where it's very easy to self-publish now. And there are people out there who make a killing doing it. I'm not one of them. This is a side hustle for me. I'm not a full-time author yet, knock on wood. But there are people who have made that work, who have a large body of self-published work, who market themselves, and they make a living doing this. That's not. And
you know what they say within the book industry, self-publication has made at least more than a third of the revenue, and we know that back in 2021, I think it was a multi-billion-dollar business. So people are making money.
Yeah, no, it can be done. It's just, with traditional publishing, there's a lot of gatekeepers to that. Publishers like, well, we only want to publish this, we don't want to publish that. But for self-publishing, there are no barriers except yourself.
You just want to make sure that your product is a good one, is a very good, that can attract attention. Because there's a downside on the self-publication also. A lot of people tend to abuse this process, which makes real authors like you and others suffer, So, and I think we should continue to encourage people to publish, but also to publish, what I call read-worthy stories, like A Cloak of Blades.
Thank you very much.
And on that note, I just want to say it's been more than a pleasure to have excellent author Isaac Sher and the conversation.
Thank you, Ardain. It's been a pleasure being here. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely, and I hope we get to talk again, either recorded or not.
When Thy Eternal Summer is out, that's that.
Oh, absolutely. Count on it.